And obviously, if you want to get the first wine poured, then that'd be a good thing to do, because we could sort of get into that one, I think, and then we can get a bit more sort of background of sort of Austrian wine and that sort of thing. Once we have something in a glass, we certainly don't want an empty glass or a sort of dry palate. Yeah, look, it looks like most people here. If anyone else wants to come in, then I'll let them join in. So yeah, as I say, welcome to tonight's Austrian wine tasting. And this is, you know, one that for me is really exciting, because for me, Austrian wine, you know, when I started my career in wine probably 15 years ago, it probably wasn't a go-to. It was something that I didn't really know much about. But certainly over the years, just one of my favorite sort of tastings to go to is the Wines of Austria tasting that normally is held in sort of Jan or Feb time, in normal times anyway. And it's just fantastic. There's so many styles, and even you're tasting sort of Rieslings next to each other or Gruners next to each other, you can it's an opportunity to really taste the differences in these wines, and they really there's so much variety there. But for me, it's all about how clean and fresh and sort of vibrant the styles are coming out of Austria. So we're sort of obviously wanting to showcase that today, plus a sort of a couple of different bits as well. Particularly the blind tasting, which will be interesting at the end of the whites. As with these tastings, you know, we don't want to sort of stand on ceremony in terms of making sure everyone's you know, making key notes about all the flavors you need to be getting, and what's the residual sugar levels, and all this sort of stuff. It's very much what I would always say is get your nose stuck into the glass, give it a bit of a swirl, get your nose in, give it a couple of good whiffs, because I think that can set you up for what the wine's all about. And often, actually, for me, I think the smell and aromas of a glass of wine, they can change and evolve much more almost in the taste whilst it's still in the glass. So that's something I definitely do. I don't expect slurping or spitting, so you're quite all right to crack on with how you'd like to taste. So tonight as well, as sort of advertised, we have a master sommelier with us tonight, Stefan Newman. You can see in your corner there. So very lucky to have him on, and yeah, he can help sort of bring some of these wines to life, I think, with a bit of information about the background of these particular areas, maybe why they taste as they do, and also probably after we've just tasted the first one, we'll have a little chat about what being a master sommelier is all about. Okay, just
it's about making sure that you have a full glass.
Yeah, exactly. That's definitely the key. We should probably put that on with all the tasting blurb that people get in through the post. We should have on the front, open the first wine before you join, so it's there and it's breathing. So yeah, the first wine here, you got this Lorenz 5, I think is how they want it to be pronounced. So you got the V meaning 5 there. And it's their friendly Gruner, which is their sort of mid-tier Gruner Veltliner style. And there's a couple of things that I think are really interesting about this particular one. Obviously, they've got their sort of names for each of their sort of levels, like friendly and things. You know, that's the sort of a nice way of describing your wine, essentially. But also, they do very much specialize in Gruner Veltliner, being from the Kamptal area. So you've got places like Kamptal, Kremstal, and the Wachau are all very in a very sort of similar area in Austria, and you're very much talking about Gruner Veltliner there, really. Although lots of different styles exist, but you're often expecting something very sort of fresh mineral, for want of a better word. It's a difficult one to explain, but sort of real sort of fresh and zinginess, essentially, that you get from these wines. Another aspect of this wine as well is that normally when you're drinking a Gruner, it is all about the fresh, and it's all about the almost drink the younger the better, really often. But in this instance, you're talking about 2016 vintage, so it's really displaying how the grape can develop, really. And obviously we've got 2 Gruners tonight, and one of them is sort of quite different. But this is just showing how how the grape can develop, and it doesn't always have to be that, oh, it can only be 2 years old scenario. It's really interesting, and that talks of the soil. It talks of how sort of well the producers have made and have grown their grapes and have made the wine. But definitely, I'd still say you're in terms of tasting, you're getting still these sort of bright sort of apple fruit, possibly a hint of apricot coming through there, but definitely the sort of apple nature. And I think then on the palate as well, you get a bit more texture possibly to compared to your normal Gruner Veltliners, because as I say, they can often be very bright and zingy and fresh, which is what I absolutely love about Austrian whites. But this one, possibly because of the age, has got that extra bit of roundness to it. Would you want to add anything, Stefan, in terms of Camptal, the area necessarily, or this producer?
Yes, there's so much to talk actually about this region, and now it's just like trying to keep it as good and as brief as possible. But winemaking in this area is a very long tradition. We talk about estates which are there since the 11th century. It's very much monks essentially which were producing wine for their own consumption in monasteries. So it's a very long growing traditions for, in general, fruit farming or good agricultural farming, but as well very much for wine. And actually the reason why this is the case is because of the French. So I need to give the French some credit here, because it was very much Benedictine and Cistercian monks which were founding monasteries in the 11th and 12th century. And as Chris said, what Gruner is always about, it's about freshness. That's one of the signature things which you will find very often. I always say this: if you put this with an international set of eyes on, it's very much like a Sauvignon Blanc in terms of the freshness, like a Sancerre, like a Pouilly-Fumé. It has quite a vibrant, fresh acidity. And this is what Gruner has, but on the other hand, it has a wonderful texture element. There's certainly body, there's intensity, there's a certain richness. In particular, with a bit of age, like here 2016, it's a wonderful made example. It's quite versatile with food. We traditionally say, if you make your Austrian food at home, everyone will know Wiener Schnitzel. So this is like a perfect wine for your Wiener Schnitzel. I personally love it with fish and chips. So it's like there's nothing which you can do wrong with it. Because it has body, has an intensity, so it goes really well with any kind of butter. So it's really up to you what you're going to do with it, but it's a very well-made example. And I mean, the names with like friendly Gruner Veltliner, charming Gruner Veltliner, it's very much made in that sense that it's for an international market. It wants to show what Gruner is out there. Gruner is something which you don't need to have a special occasion to open it. If so, great if you open a Gruner, but Gruner is something which you put on the table and people have fun and joy with it. And I mean, this area in particular, it's named after a river, which is called Kamp. It's a tributary to the Danube River. It's not a particular large growing area, but to put this a bit in perspective, you talk about 4,000 hectares. So that's about the northern size or the northern Rhone Valley. So half of that is planted for Gruner Veltliner. So it's a massive, if you think of it, half of the region is planted with Gruner. So there's a real dedication for it.
Absolutely, and as you say, just the sort of concentration of this, I think, is really beautiful. Also coming from that age, and definitely, people are traveling again. So at some stage, it's obviously a wonderful part of Austria to go to, particularly as you say, with different different sort of sub-regions within such a short.
I mean, a lot of people are always surprised when you go to this area because it's relatively flat. You know, you will know Austria for mountains, but the mountains are predominantly in the west. You go to the east, it's pretty flat. During summer, it's hot there. So if you feel like we're having a little summer holiday, during the summer, we get anything between 30 to 35 degrees. So it's pretty warm. And I mean, when I say flat, you know, for Austrians, it's flat. You know, anything below 1,000 meters is flat for us. You've got a lot of really beautiful terraced vineyards. If you have actually your screen on, you just need to look what Jamie is having as a background picture. As you can see, he's very well prepared there. So he's got a really good shot actually of the terraced vineyards there. So, and that's actually very important because generally speaking, the slopes are very, very steep. So planting vineyards, then having vineyards there is only possible with terraces. But it's definitely worth a visit. I mean, to give you a bit of an idea in terms of the location and geography, it's give or take 45 minutes drive away from the capital city in Vienna. And from Heathrow, it's like 2 hours flight, 2.5 hours flight to Vienna. And then you're pretty quickly in the Kamptal, so 45, 50 minutes drive, depending on your driving.
Well, that's a good bit. That's a good bit of tourist board, because I mean that's that's sort of the fantastic thing. You know, when we can travel again, is that all these places are often a short hop away, and there'll be airports sort of nearby to a lot of these wine regions, and it's quite fascinating that within sort of 3 hours you can be in amongst the vines in somewhere completely different. I
mean, it's very traditional for us to have small vineyard holdings. So you talk about family which are running the vineyards and which are running the wineries. There's very few larger companies out there, and it's quite densely in terms of the plantings itself. I mean, to give you a bit of a spectrum for this and a bit of an idea, if you look at Kamptal as a region, you've got around 500 people as a wine producer and people who are producing wine. So in comparison, if you put this with Bordeaux, it's like it's a different world. You know, for us, much smaller holdings, much more boutique and artisanal crafted products.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned something like Bordeaux, because you know, Bordeaux sort of you know, makes sort of double the volume of sort of New Zealand as a whole, don't they, in terms of their so it's whilst it's seen as ultra premium, essentially, there's a lot that they have there and a lot of juice. And as you say, it's the other scale here with these wines and these producers. I mean, we can potentially touch therefore on wine number 2 as well, the Riesling. You know, these guys have I think they're sort of relatively sort of new on the block essentially, but they have, you know, they own 5 vineyards. And they're, you know, again, sort of specializing in Riesling in this instance. So these guys obviously are boutique-y and want to produce sort of the best they can from the area that they're in, and they are then in the Wachau, these guys.
I mean, Wachau, again, if you get a chance, it's a UNESCO World Heritage since 2000. It's a really pretty stunning area. I have to find only positive words for Wachau because I grew up there. So it's a rather stunning piece of a wine growing region. Again, very long tradition there. Riesling itself is quite widely planted. Again, quite steep terraces, but it's a much smaller area than Kamptal. It's a third of the size, but with the same amount of growers. So you talk about 2 hectares per grower, that's like nothing. It's actually good comparable if you know Portugal, if you go to Vinho Verde in Portugal, if you try to Malvarinhos from there, it's very similar vineyard holdings. You know, it's like families and which are having like 1 or 2 hectares and selling their grapes. And Riesling there actually is thanks to the Germans found its way to Austria. But this particular example here is actually a really good example for having something quite fresh, vibrant in terms of a style of a Riesling. There's this hint of these peaches, apricots, again, a bit of an apple-y thing going on there, but it's more towards a green apple thing for me. But it's about fresh and vibrancy. And most importantly, it's about dry styles. You know, we Austrians love dry styles. We don't really produce sweet Rieslings. It's not our thing. Doesn't really work too well with our local cuisine as well. So we love dry, fresh, citrusy styles. And I think, you know, with Riesling, it's a good example here. When you look at the notes which you have been given, there's written one term which is called Federspiel, and Federspiel sort of classifies the style of wine in the Wachau. You've got 3 styles: Steinfeder, Federspiel, which is sort of the middle one, and Smaragd. Smaragd, we try one later. that's quite rich, full-bodied styles, but Federspiel sort of sits very beautifully in the middle of sort of a good balance between power, elegance, but at the same time, we talked on this before about minerality, you know, it gives you sort of that fresh citrusy zing to the wines.
And it's interesting you touch on the sort of sweetness essentially, and I suppose that's where often people do go with Riesling, don't they? They see potentially Riesling on the shelf or on a wine list, and potentially back off from it sometimes in terms of not necessarily knowing what style it's going to be. So that's very interesting that you say that obviously in Austria that they do err towards the drier styles. Whether that gives people sort of confidence that if they see something on the shelf to go for that, if they prefer that sort of style. But I guess it's Riesling being such a versatile grape variety, it's always going to have all these different styles, and obviously some people really enjoy the off-dry nature to certainly the German ones and other ones around the world. Certainly we've got a lovely sort of slightly off-dry Central Otago New Zealand one here as well, and they absolutely work. But as you say, it's about local cuisine. It's about what can be produced and what they want to produce, really, in that respect.
I mean, for us, it's, I said, very much about the dry style. I mean, to put this maybe in an international sort of comparison, from a technical point of view, the second wine is around 2 grams of residual sugar per liter. International speaking, that's like your dry sherry. That's like technically that's that dry. But what Riesling always has is that sort of, I call this a fruit sweetness. You know, there's a lot of fruit there, which gives you the impression of sweetness. It's sort of a bit of a trick and treat. When you smell it, it may trick you to believe it's sweet, but when you try it, it's like it's a pleasant, dry treat to it. So it's a variety which certainly has suffered in the last years a bit with the reputation, but for us, it's all about ultimately it's about the balance. We want to have something which we put on the table, which we enjoy drinking, and for us, a style like this ticks so many boxes.
And yes, I think you're right that it's Riesling does have a sort of has had a tough time of it in a sense, because people, as I say, sort of maybe don't know what style to expect. But also, would you say that people are getting their maybe heads around terms like Federspiel and things like that, or is that still a big sort of education point for the consumer?
And I think there's one thing. I was hoping you're going to ask the question, so I prepared a bottle, but there's something which is always written on the label. I can pop this in the chat as well, which is called trocken, and that's the term for dry. And as soon as you see this on the label, you know automatically it must be dry. It's a legal regulation, so I popped this just in the chat. And, I learned a lot about the technical part of it, but the most important thing with wine is, and no other person can tell it, that you either like it or you don't like it. It's as simple as that. Sometimes the technical terms can be quite confusing, and there's a lot of regulations behind. But in the end of the day, when you look on the label and you see trocken, then you will know it's dry, and that's the best piece of information most likely you can get at a certain stage.
Yeah, absolutely, and also a good guide is often the sort of alcohol content as well. And I guess that's maybe if it's on a wine list in a restaurant, they'll either have one or the other. It'll either say trocken, or it might even have the alcohol percentage there. Because if it is sort of 9%, then you'll anticipate that it'll be a bit sweeter style, because there's sort of residual sugar, so bouncing out then the sort of acidity balance essentially. But certainly if you're getting 12.5, which is this, then you'll be getting more of a dry style essentially. That will give you confidence.
And my advice is always there: if you're not sure, just ask. It's like thankfully the times are over in restaurants where people put up their nose and saying, "Oh, you should know." I get so many questions asking, how is this style of wine, and I love to explain this. And it's the same what I do with my stuff. The most important thing, if you ask, we're gonna give you the best possible answer we can, because in the end of the day, especially now, we haven't seen guests for so long, so we love to talk again, in person.
And obviously, Stefan, as well as Master Sommelier, is also director of wines at Dinner by Heston. So is that? Do you have fairly demanding customer base at Dinner by Heston in terms of simply the amount, the sort of per head spend must be reasonable and things like that.
Yeah, well, I think, I would never say demanding, because everything becomes easier after 2-3 glasses of wine. So I think, at the end of the day, it's like what wine should be and always will be, regardless in which restaurant you work and which position and which fancy title you might have or might not have. But it should be something which you enjoy drinking, and it brings people together. It brings tonight people together, and that's the most important thing. So yes, there's sometimes people which have very specific requirements what they want, but in the end of the day, the reason why they order a bottle of wine is to enjoy it. That's we have something to drink and have something to pair with a particular dish or with throughout the menu. So it's always about the enjoyment which comes first. And very often, the more you overthink that scenario, or this is a particular wealthy person, is going to be very, very complicated. No, I always say it's the simple things in life which make you happy, and that very much comes down to wine as well. It does not always need the most expensive bottle of wine, which can give you great pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, as well, it's at the end of the day, it's a glass of wine. And you can move on to something else after that glass of wine if you choose to do so.
Absolutely.
But there's been a question come through in the chat actually about the maximum residual sugar.
9 grams per liter. So in Austria, it's 9 grams per liter.
Okay.
There are some other regulations in place if the total acidity level is higher or in relations with the residual sugar, but generally it's 9 grams per liter. Okay. Very, very often people stay under 9 grams. So the most common one you would find for Grüne Veltliner is 4 to 5, for Riesling 3 to 4 grams, which is basically bone dry. There's not noticeable sweetness there, but generally the regulations would say 9 grams. There is a term sometimes which is used still, which is called halbtrocken, which would indicate 18 grams, but it's barely used in Austria anymore. So the majority would be 9 grams trocken or below 9 grams.
Yeah. Okay. And just to talk a little bit more about this one as well. Obviously, with any grape variety, sort of obviously soils are so integral. And as you said before about the Wachau with their terraced terraces on the slopes and things like that. Obviously, there's altitude there and things, but you're talking here about really sort of sandy soils and gravelly as well, which, I mean, some of the best Rieslings have that sort of slaty gravel nature.
Yeah.
And
I mean, there's sort of 2 major soil conditions which you find. I mean, regardless if we talked before, Wachau, Kammtal, Kremstal, you've got one soil which is called Löss. I popped this into the chat, because as beautiful as the German language is, it's not always that easy. But Löss is essentially very fine grade silt or sandstone, has good water retention, so it's really good for Grüne Veltliner. Grüne Veltliner needs to be needs a bit of TLC sometimes for Grüne. Need to make sure it's well looked after. Riesling, on the other hand, particular Wachau and Kammtal, Kremstal, grows on one soil which is called Gneiss. As we would say, gneiss is very nice. I popped this in the chat as well. So gneiss is a metamorphic rock. It's very hard. And another soil which you find quite often is granite. Again, very hard rock. Gneiss comes in many different forms and shapes. There's blue, red, green, black. Every producer will tell you about their nice gneiss, but it's basically very hard, rocky soil. So to put this very bluntly, nothing else will grow on gneiss besides of wine. Nothing. You do find on the lower parts of the slopes where there's more the sandy and more loamy and maybe a bit more clay, you find some fruit trees like apricots, peaches, with really good apricot trees. But otherwise, on the terraced vineyards, the higher you go, it's a very poor soil. So the wines really need to go very, very deep in order to get some nourishment. And the more important thing, that's the fun thing now actually for us, we're always very keen on organic and biodynamic and natural wine, and people like to hear where the wines are from and what has happened. We are in general very low in herbicides or pesticides which we use in the vineyards. Austria, actually after New Zealand, funnily enough, has one of the highest density of organic or biodynamic certified vineyards. So that's mainly down to the reason it's very often generations and different families and different generations which are in charge. They like to leave something behind for the future. So if it's your plot of land, you don't spray herbicides and pesticides on there. You're gonna make sure you're gonna look after it to the best of your abilities. And when you go to Wachau, you will see that's like, it's not only it's a beautiful landscape, that's always very subjective, you know, but generally speaking, it's like very well looked after by the people which are farming the lands, very respectfully looked after.
And as you say, because they're often sort of small holdings that the people have, that yeah, you're right. It's and I suppose I always try to get that across to people in wine tastings as well, in terms of you know, these wine growers are farmers. They're tending the land, and as you say, they want to certainly if it's sort of privately owned essentially, and they're you know, they'll be passing on to their generations, they want to respect it and make sure that they're not sort of ruining it for years to come, if you like. And there's a massive sort of worldwide trend, I think, now to push on the organics and biodynamics to sort of to sort of nurture the soils more and bring them back, because it can take a long time to get rid of any sort of pesticides, herbicides that people do use. So it's and I think for me, that just what Stefan said there about how land's treated, I really feel that comes through in the wines in terms of the freshness of Austrian wines, sort of in general. Really, I think that's something that's so sort of unique, and it absolutely makes sense that be how they tend. But just before we get into wine number 3, obviously, and the link here is that Domaine Wachau is headed up by a master of wine. So just to touch on Stefan and your sort of master sommelier tag, what sort of does that entail essentially? What you've had to have gone through to have attained that title?
Well, I obviously tried a lot of wine. I had the pleasure of trying a lot of wine. I mean, it's an exam which you go through, and there's a few different levels. I mean, to cut the long story short, what you essentially do is you being part of a group which is called Court of Master Sommeliers. You do 3 different exams before you're allowed to attend the MS exam. And once you do this, then you know, another journey begins. But what this exam essentially does, it tests you in a few different aspects. You know, in a theoretical aspect, meaning like pure knowledge. It gives you several practical scenarios, like open champagne, food, wine recommendations, and bringing in the knowledge in there as well. Difficult scenarios, you know, you've got a screaming guest in the restaurant, what do you do? Things like this. And you have tastings, which is blind tasting. So you need to identify 6 wines within 25 minutes, or everything is scored. 75% is the pass mark you need to reach. Generally speaking, the first 3 parts, they go from a 90% pass rate to the 3rd exam to around 20% pass rate. And for the MS exam, the average passing rate is 3%. So it's not that high. So people keep on trying. I've personally tried this for 5 times that I managed, which I'm very happy about. The only person which was more happy than me was my wife, because finally the fridge was again a food fridge, not a wine fridge. But yeah, I mean, I work in the wine industry for 15 years, and wine is very much part of my life. And you know, before this call today, and I had a call to Greece. Before that, I was tasting around 30 Californian wines. So wine is very much part of what I am. And to tie this in, what the Master of Wine essentially is, you know, you've got Roman Herbert, which is the managing director of Domaine Wachau, so the 3rd wine. So Master of Wine and Master Sommeliers have a lot in common. We both know a little bit about wine, but you know, the more you know, the more you realize how little you know. But with MWs, they have a little bit more of an academic approach. They normally work in the trades, so they normally do what Chris does. And Master Sommeliers like me, they normally work in restaurants, you know. But there's exceptions to this rule as well. So there's very good MSs which are working in the trade, and there's MWs which are working in restaurants. So it's very different. But what we have in common is a love for wine and an appreciation for the product, and in particular for myself, and about sharing this product. And that's the best wine is the one which you enjoy with friends and family. You know, it's like it's a bit boring when you only enjoy it by yourself.
Well, exactly, and here we are sharing them with everybody else, and that's such a wonderful thing that we're able to do in these times. Share these wines with people. There's a question also there actually about what other countries and regions potentially are sort of underrated as well as Austrian wine. Is there
maybe a good thing?
Yeah.
I mean, I put a number out there. Actually, the UK is the 6th strongest market for Austrian wine. I mean, there's Scandinavian countries which are above that, and US and Germany. Germany is taking half of our production. It's just to showcase how much Austrians sell their wines to Germany. I think it's sometimes good that it's a bit underrated, and we did some things in the past which weren't pretty in the mid 80s, and we've moved on from this. But Austrian wine maybe now is it's very niche. You know, wine in general is a niche product, but Austrian wine is very niche. And the main reason for this is because it's mainly family-run business, quite small. Going into the export markets, in particular the UK. UK is such a competitive market. It's a market where it's very hard to establish yourself. So for a small grower to make that step outside of Austria, going into the export market and then going to London or to the UK, it's an investment. You know, it's you sell your wines cheaper than you maybe should. You sell your wines for a price because you've been negotiated down. UK is a very competitive market for this. You know, it's there's a lot of wines which come to the UK which won't come to Europe. So I think, you know, in the end of the day, it's yes, underrated, but maybe for a good reason.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I would say certainly in terms of the last 10 years, probably most sort of importers, I would say, that I've dealt with have added more and more Austrian wines into their portfolios, and I think that's obviously largely they'll be doing that because they see a demand for it. So hopefully that's, you know, the tide is there, that people are looking into it, and certainly Grüner Veltliner is a sort of calling card, really. I suppose that's something that people
yeah, it's a super versatile variety, so it's very popular and different cuisine. It works with different cuisines really well. I mean, there's maybe one more thing which I would say, you know, for underrated. You know, you compare this to the total Austrian production in comparison with the total French production. So we produce 3% of the total French production. So if we put this in comparison, so just 3%, and give or take 80% of our wines go into the export market. Stay domestically, so only 20% go into the export market. So we don't produce really much, neither we put much into the export market. So it's like, yeah, there isn't that much around, as simple as that. You know, that's and Grüner certainly over the last years had a bit of an, you know, was certainly a fashionable and trendy variety. And I think the reason why is like putting my restaurant hat on here, and my personal taste as well. I love cooking. But Grüner has the ability to work really well across the board. You know, I'm very lucky. I'm married to a lady from Hong Kong, and pairing Grüner with dim sum is absolutely delicious. Pairing Grüner with some sushi or sashimi is very, very good. You can pair Grüner very easily with richer dishes for white meat. You know, so it's a very versatile variety. So certainly a lot of UK suppliers have said, you know what? We're going to put this in our program. I think it's going to be good, because in the end of the day, again, it's a quite affordable wine. You know, you put it in a spectrum of other international varieties and other international countries or regions, whatever. Grüner doesn't get much more expensive than 30, 40 pounds, you know, and the majority sits in the 15-pound price bracket, you know, and this is obviously a quite competitive price range, but nevertheless, you know, it's still affordable, and you get a lot of, sorry for using it, but you get, normally, generally speaking, a lot of bang for your bucks with Grüner.
It's interesting to talk about the versatility of food, because really in terms of number 3, I'd say that could be had with sort of mature cheddar, even that sort of style, and even potentially even a sort of charcuterie board.
Yeah.
You could certainly manage a sort of very savoury.
I think, when I'm sure some have tried already 3, which, it's a good step up for 1 and 2 now, because it's certainly a bit of a richer, more structured style. And what we said before, we had a Federspiel, which is sort of the middle category. Now we're towards Smaragd. So it's named, Smaragd is the name given because there's little lizards, it's green lizards, which breed in the vineyards. So the lizards normally only breed in the warmest spots, and the warmest spots are the really just where purely rock is located. So they don't normally breed there. So the highest quality of wines within that region are called after the lizards, or named after the lizards. And Smaragd always has a bit of a certain body intensity and structure, but it never forgets that citrusy, fresh backbone. But it's more like sort of an orange peel than this lemon or lime which we had before.
Yeah, and as I say, it very much talks of of that sort of different temperature really in the microclimate there, and as you say, the rocky nature as well, and certainly where the river flows there, you can get these microclimates that are very different to each other, just around literally a river bend, but definitely that extra concentration, and hopefully people are picking up on that as well. In terms of, there's almost a sort of savory nature to it, but definitely still a bit of apple, but yeah, a sort of citrus peel. It's a bit more weighty, a bit more potentially serious, perhaps you would say, but certainly you can match.
A little bit more layered, I would generally say. It's a bit more of a complex wine, but complexity is something subjective. What you normally get for Gruner, and maybe just to throw out a few tasting descriptors here, where people say, maybe I can smell this. What people normally get for Gruner is quite often this riper tree fruit characteristics, so there's apples and pears. But you get very often a certain vegetal or herbal characteristic. So when we say vegetal, we mainly mean something like green beans, asparagus. Some people say cabbage or radish. For me, it's generally more white asparagus than green asparagus. You certainly get a bit of an herbal quality to the wine. But, all of these descriptors are, interesting to throw out there. But the most important thing, you like the wine or you don't, it's certainly something which would require maybe a little snack on the side. So a charcuterie board will do a great job there. It's a wine which certainly you can drink on its own, but it gets into its own element once you put a bit of protein next to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's fantastic acidity here as well, and really, I suppose that's the backbone of certainly the Austrian whites have that freshness, but acidity is a sort of difficult thing to really talk about, because obviously people, when you're talking about descriptors, people don't necessarily want to hear things that might sound a bit negative. So when you're talking about acids, that might sound a little bit negative because you're thinking, oh no, I don't want something acidic. But really, it's what
freshness,
the backbone of all wines, really.
I think, for me, this is an example which again is bone dry. Just technically speaking, it's 1.3 grams of sugar, so it's bone dry, but it doesn't taste like this. There's a lovely juiciness around this. I think maybe the best example which you can give, if you look at the 3 glasses which you had, which is the one which you drank the most of, so most likely that's going to be a favorite. If it's 1, 2, or 3, then that's a story. But it's just interesting to see what your personal preference is, and it shows different sides of Austrian wine.
Yeah, I mean, do people maybe sort of hold up fingers or something for this, in terms of which sort of white would you prefer, maybe as your style of white, essentially, because they are quite different. So you've got a 2 and a 3. You've got 3 there as well.
2 and 3.
Fair enough. That can work.
I love
it. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think they they're a step up. I think from potentially wine one, but wine one does a wonderful job at what it does. But certainly, I think this Smaragd, if you pronounce it like that, it comes in a touch under £20, and it delivers so much. As you say, it's so versatile.
It would be hard to find something else for that price bracket. I know that's And the main reason for this is because Domaine Wachau is basically the local cooperative from the region, and sounds always bad when you talk about a cooperative, but there's a very famous English wine writer. Her name is Frances Robinson, wonderful woman, and she always says, Domaine Wachau is hands down the best cooperative in the world. So it's quite good when an English person is saying this, because it puts a little bit more weight to it than when I would say it. But what they essentially do is to work with many small growers together. As we said before, people sometimes do this as not as a living, but they do this as a hobby. So they have a couple of wines to look after, a small parcel, and to sell it to Domaine Wachau, and they produce wine on their behalf. So it's great to see that there's as well a community of people which are working together to produce something. As it seems like a lot of people enjoy it free, so it seems like it's quite delicious.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think you're right about co-ops. Often that crops up in these sort of tastings as well, in terms of about where cooperatives lie in the wine world. But I mean, the fact is, a lot of producers, even if they do sort of own the majority of their vines, will still have contract growers with people, and it doesn't mean it's out of anybody's control in a sense. They're very much involved with these. It just happens to be that the vineyards are sort of owned and essentially farmed by somebody else, but it's very much under the auspices, if you like, of whoever the main sort of winery is that are buying the grapes. I think there's a lot of great
picture.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just interesting to see that someone popped this in the chat. Really like Praga wines from Wachau, and I like Praga as well. Actually, the younger generation of Praga was selling to Domaine Wachau. So before they established themselves alone, they were selling to Domaine Wachau. And someone else asked, how do Austrians and your customers view English wines? There's only one way of putting this. It's thumbs up general, because there's a lot going on, lots of good things going on with English wine, in particular English sparkling wine. So there's a big appreciation for this, and there's more and more coming. I think the world of wine is changing anyway, and there's a couple of degrees more in terms of when we talk about global warming, certainly has helped English wine to be in a very, very good spot as they are. So general for these questions, big thumbs up as well in Austria. As a very solid and good example to bring forward here, I have a very good friend which is putting tasting boxes for Austrians together on a monthly basis, and there was one which he did a couple of months ago about the English bubbles, and so he had 6 English sparkling wine which he sold to Austrians, and they loved it. So it's called Taste Outside of the Box, which was the idea behind having something which is not usual. So English wines are very well viewed. And then we just have some feedback. Number 3, with food, yes. Now the thing is, with free, it makes you salivate. You really want to have something to eat with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then somebody's obviously said an English tasting, please. So that an English tasting will be coming at some point, possibly June. You heard it here first. End of June, might just be putting some English wines together and dropping them around in these little bottles that you've become used to. So that'll be we're very excited about that. Actually, we're going to obviously approach lots of different producers, and I think the thing with English sparkling, that's definitely sort of led the way for English wines. You have champagne houses now who have bought land over here. Tattinger, for example, have an English wine coming on stream any day now, really, I think.
Hopefully soon, yeah. I mean, they planted 2-3 years ago, so they should be ready to go. But
yeah.
Don't rush them.
No, absolutely. But it's interesting. That's the way it's going. But I think a key thing, and I can absolutely appreciate that probably abroad the sparkling wines will be the sort of trailblazers for English wine, but it's about getting still wines at a reasonable price, and also consistent, I think, in this country as well. I think we're getting there with some whites. It's about what works as well, what grape varieties work. We're still everything's still being.
This is like when you produce English wine right now, you need to hit the ground running. It's a tough business out there, and as you said so correctly, Chris, and it's so much about having the right varieties here. You look at the plantings, Pinot Noir I think does really well. There's some good dry Chardonnays as well, and Bacchus is a variety. I think there's some good Bacchus out there. So if you like someone said I like Australian and New Zealand wine, there we go. So I think Bacchus, if Bacchus is well made in the UK, it may not be as fresh as a New Zealand Sauvignon, but it has certainly a similar characteristic than New Zealand Sauvignon. So it's quite an interesting variety. So Bacchus is certainly something which I think does well in the UK.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we might just have a Bacchus in that particular tasting.
Who knows?
Yeah.
No spoilers. We did already too many spoilers here.
Yeah, that's it. So yeah, I mean, you've all got a sample of a wine there with a question mark on it. So it's probably time to do the blind tasting. Oh, there's Jamie with his. Yeah, this will just be sort of interesting to sort of see people's maybe reaction to this, and just sort of it's a certain potentially style as well. So yeah, as I say, you know, always get your nose stuck into it if it's a tasting in this sort of respect, where you're sort of specifically trying to maybe look for some different flavors and maybe trying to work out potentially what great variety it is, what flavors you are getting from it. It's definitely good to get your nose in there. So I mean, obviously the clue is that it's a wine from Austria.
That's not much of a clue.
But yeah, I mean, I guess this is interesting because it potentially demonstrates other styles potentially in Austria, but also other great varieties that work as well. And obviously Austria, I think you've got sort of potentially 20 or 30 great varieties that you grow there, and from everything from the international great varieties to things like Gruner, where the home is in Austria. So you know, there's a lot going on, and you know, there should be enough people to find their sort of niche, if you like.
I mean, just to touch on that, you know, you've got around 30 different varieties approved for white, and Gruner Veltliner, let alone, takes around 31 to 33% of the total plantings. So it's massive for us, you know. But we do get a fair bit of international varieties on there. And to give an example, we like to be a bit cheeky as well in the way how we do things. So for example, Viognier is a variety, is not allowed in Austria. So we don't really care. We still plant it. We just don't label it as a Viognier. We just write a V on it, and that's it. So we always find ways of breaking or bending the rules ever so slightly. But I mean, in particular for this example, which is the blind tasting, it's kind of interesting to see. It shows a bit of a different side of Austrian wine. And you know, blind tastings always, no matter how often or how little you do them, I definitely got more things wrong in the blind tastings than right. But you know, in order to learn and sometimes, you know, to get better, you need to get things wrong. But it's a particular difficult one, if I may say that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not easy. You didn't make it easy there, Chris.
Possibly a bit harsh. But I mean, I obviously people are coming through with their things there, and absolutely, I get that stone fruit, and also that hint of a someone said sort of petrol element. There's something there that's definitely different to the ones we've had before. I would almost maybe say it's a bit more in sort of intensely tropical. There's sort of maybe guava and things like that there potentially.
There's a bit of a creamy edge to it as well in the end, and the slight, I call this sort of this bitter almonds, sort of dried nuts, which you get. It leaves you with a dry finish, but it's like when you eat almonds and almonds make your mouth feel dry. That's the feeling which I get here. So there's a very pleasant bitterness which is coming through. So it's like, it's less that fruit sweetness which you've got from the others. It's more slightly bitter almonds, slightly nutty, and a slightly creamy component there with this tick of exotic fruits.
Yeah,
it's just a very different wine than the other two or the other three.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And there's probably a couple of a couple of reasons for that. I mean, do people sort of are you enjoying the flavors of this one, or are you sort of preferring maybe the wines from before 2 and 3?
Is that international varieties just to help? Yes, there's 2 international varieties in there.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, you're talking about Austrian take on Chardonnay. Well,
don't tell everyone.
don't tell everyone, exactly.
Brilliant.
So yeah, I mean, this is a blend, and Chardonnay being a component in there. So that's great to pick that out. And again, that's possibly the sort of tropical nature that's going on there, plus potentially the texture of it. Often Chardonnay does have that sort of richness and roundness.
I think number 3 is like, because a few people said I like 3 very much. 3 is a wine which instantly sort of gets you, that perfume of the wine, that texture element, that fruit. Where if you like something which is more savory and less, maybe a little bit more floral, and this, as I said before, this creaminess to it, then 4 is maybe more your wine. I mean, it's Grüne Veltliner, if I'm not mistaken, Chardonnay in there, and Weißburgunder, which is basically Pinot Blanc or Pinot Bianco, so the way you want to call it. But Weißburgunder is the Austrian or German term for it.
Yeah, and there's so many good single varietal Weißburgunders out there as well. So it's possibly a bit of a tough one for a blind, but it's just interesting getting people's feedback, because this is, it's a different style. People are, it's not all about the single varietals, and often you can get something really interesting with a blend like this. And I think the fact that they've put Chardonnay in as a sort of the second great variety in terms of the one that will be the second proportion essentially in this, I think that's interesting. And Weißburgunder, as I say, I've got a lot of time for that. We definitely need a single varietal Weißburgunder in this shop. I think this you often get a sort of delicate nature to them, but they can be just that little bit sort of rounder. And Pinot Blanc, I mean, it stands to reason that Pinot Blanc or Pinot Blanco is made there. I mean, it's often something that you find in the sort of northern Italy, in the sort of Dolomites, or that sort of those sort of areas. You're getting Pinot Blanco. So it stands to reason that Austria do it very well as well. And I think I think this is very, very, very interesting. It's and it sort of marries that potentially delicate nature of a Weißburgunder with that Chardonnay element to it.
It's a wine maybe which is as well best enjoyed with some food, if I say that. If you have your lemon sole, if you, in general, white fish would work really well with this. It's a wine which has more of a texture element there than the primary characteristic of fruit. So it's a very different wine than we had before. It's as well interesting to see the feedback there. Someone said my daughter was drinking too much, so it's like
yeah,
brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's all right. Bigger samples, we can always do bigger samples, don't you worry about that.
I think the bigger sample is basically coming to the shop.
Yeah, exactly. So this one, it's by Divald. If that shows properly, it's called Chagru. And to be honest, it's one of these wines that I've liked for a long time, and we're it's something that we very much want with our customers as well, to have sort of guidance on terms of where we should be going with wines as well. There's so much variety out there. As Stefan was saying, the UK market is so ultra competitive. There's so much choice. So that that's to some degree down to your local wine merchant to just sort of decipher that choice in terms of what they're led by in terms of the customers. So it's any sort of feedback like you've been giving is absolutely wonderful, because then we can make those sort of buying decisions on your behalf and using that sort of information really, and that's very, very interesting. Someone's asked whether it's oak barreled, which I don't think it is.
That creamy texture which you get is something which is called lees aging. It's the fancy term for it. It's basically the grape juice is in contact with the grape skins for an experiment for several hours, sometimes on occasions longer than that, at a certain temperature. The more fancy term even is called skin contact. Yeah, grape skins in contact with grape juice. It basically what it does, it extracts flavor, but it extracts as well this sort of slightly buttery, creamy, lactic feel to the wine. It's a technique which is quite widely used in Burgundy, for example. If you make Chardonnay, it's something which is quite common. And as there's Chardonnay in here and Pinot Blanc, these varieties lends itself quite well to skin contact.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's, there's so much that can be done in winemaking to give all these different sort of textures, essentially, and it certainly doesn't have to always be oak. Oak's a funny old thing, because it can really, you know, you've got to be very careful with it, really, in terms of what you're wanting to impart on the wine, maybe how you're wanting the wine to develop and age. And certainly, you know, if you've got some sort of delicate aromas sometimes and delicate flavors, putting it in barrel, depending on what grape varieties are, it can knock those delicate flavors sometimes. So it very much depends. I mean, that's maybe a question for Stefan there. I mean, in terms of is sort of barrel aging, you know, quite a big deal in Austria, or is it much more the sort of fresh, bright style?
There's a simple answer to this, or two simple answers to this. And the reason why Austrian wine is fairly reasonable priced is because oak is expensive. Buying a new oak barrel, 225 liters, will cost you 300 to 600 pounds. So it automatically adds onto your bottle anything between 2 to 3 pounds per bottle, and we don't talk about anything else. So oak is in general quite expensive, and very often it's not what we're after. Besides of that, I mentioned before that we are like, we work in an organic, biodynamic, very often natural way. We look after our land and our soil. So very often you would find in wineries large barrels which have been passed on from generation to generation. So when I say large barrels, could be anything between 1,000 to 10,000 liters. So massive barrels. So, and they don't really give any oak flavor to this. They just give a certain softness and add harmony rather than to it. If you have a high acid variety, in order to soften the acidity down, you put it in a vessel. Could be a stainless steel, could be clay, or in this case, oak, and it just softens the edges. So for us, there's not a great tradition of aging too much in oak. We like to keep things relatively simple. And as I said, you know, what we do, we look after these barrels, and it's sort of a proud thing if a father is then passing on this particular barrel to his son. So it's a more generational thing. So if you go to Austrian wineries, you will see quite often really, really big barrels.
Yeah, and as you say, that's sort of, it has less. It's more about marrying the wines together, because obviously
if you see in the background of Chris, you know, like that's a piece which you've got there, 225, no?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So the technical term is a piece in Bordeaux, so 225 liter. Imagine an Austrian winery would have a barrel which is, give or take, 10 times the size of this. And this is the moment where they age one particular parcel or one particular variety in there. And when you have such a large surface, the oak doesn't really play much of a part in impacting flavor.
Yeah, but they, I guess, obviously the shape of the barrel will encourage movement, and therefore, I guess the sort of wines sort of marry together a bit better, don't they? Yeah, and you say the larger ones, it's more about getting the style and the quality there, not necessarily imparting flavors. Yeah. And talking about imparting flavors, obviously we've got the two reds. So yeah, I mean, if you've got the glassware there, if one, you can you know, maybe pour both reds out in separate glasses. That's often a quite an interesting thing to do. I mean, I think it's the sort of thing that when one's in the sort of wine trade, we do a lot of sort of comparing in that respect, but it's not normally what people do at home in terms of sitting.
Just make sure that daughter is getting a good sip this time.
Yeah, but definitely, I think on the nose, these are both very different and talk of different certainly grape varieties, but also different sort of places as well. Yeah, I mean, but as I say, on the nose for both, it's still, for me, there's a fragrance, there's a freshness of both of these, even though you know, you might be getting different things on the palate, but certainly I think that sort of vibrancy is just speaks to me of Austrian wine, even throughout the reds.
There's one thing which I would always say now is like, because we had like 4 wines with quite high acid, so don't judge a book by its cover. Have a good sip of the first red wine, and before you make up your mind, have another sip, because your palate needs a bit of time to adjust, and the second and the third sip will taste different than the first one. And in particular, when you had the white wine, which was quite crunchy and quite high in acid and quite fresh, it's good to give the red wine, and in this case, these particular 2 red wines, a bit of time. So have 1 sip, swallow, then have a second sip, so you sort of prepare your wonderful palate for what is about to come.
So here we have a Zweigelt by Pfaffel. Zweigelt possibly is, I mean, Stefan might be able to say more in terms of the amount sort of under vine that is in Austria and percentages.
It's the most planted variety, so most planted red variety.
Yeah, so it's almost if a house will have their, you know, their Gruner. I mean, this is from sort of northern Austria, sort of again not too far from a place like Kamstal and Kremptal as well. That they might have their Gruner, but often when it comes to the reds, they'll have a Zweigelt in the stable as well. And I suppose that's, as I say, it's become the sort of staple red grape variety, really, the one that perhaps they hang the hat on, and also I think one that shows off what Austria is all about, maybe the best from a red point of view, just because they're largely quite sort of fragrant, aromatic, sort of light cherry fruit, not a million miles from a Pinot Noir, really, in that sense. I think possibly a little bit deeper in color, but there's a lovely sort of crunchiness often to the sort of palate. So there's, you know, often a hint of a tannin there, but the juicy fruit often sort of brings it through. So it's not too, you know, it's not too rich in any respect, which obviously then allows it to work well with foods as well. But yeah, I think if people have, if you do see a Zweigelt on the label, and this possibly goes back to why people are talking about underrated Austrian wines to an extent, because, you know, it's probably taking a while for grapes like Grüne Veltliner even to make its mark, but certainly Zweigelt. But I think you will be seeing more and more of those on restaurant wine lists and in shops. And really, I think it's a wonderful style to take a punt on, whichever the producer is. As I say, the vibrancy there. I mean, obviously you do have Pinot Noir in Austria too, but this one's a lovely alternative if you're wanting something that's sort of bright and fresh style, potentially even chilled as well. I would say with a meat board or potentially even a goat's cheese, that sort of thing would be absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, for us, this variety is quite important because it's not only the most planted Austrian variety. And there was this question, what percentage of Austrian wine produced is red? It's give or take 30%. It's an increasing amount, but give or take 30% is red, which is quite sounds quite a lot. It is actually, is more and more getting planted. This Zweigel is, if you know Vienna as a capital city, you go north of Vienna, it's give or take half an hour drive, and you come to this charming village, which is called Stetten. And Zweigelt needs quite warm conditions, so it may come as a surprise, but the further east you go, the closer you come to the Hungarian border, the flatter Austria becomes, and we have, give or take, anything between 2,000 to 2,400 sun hours a year. So that's equivalent to Tuscany, and that's equivalent to some parts of Spain. So it's a warm area and sunny area. And Zweigelt is always about this sort of fresh, fruity, aromatic approach. So this, as Chris said so perfectly, cherry is something which we always sort of feel like this very often there, sort of this red cherry, morello cherry, it's like this sour cherry component, and there's always a bit of a floral lift to it, sort of these roses, violets. And from a color point of view and from an international point of view, Pinot Noir is a very good comparison. A lot of people compare it to younger styles of Gamay or to younger styles of Syrah or Shiraz. So if you have like a younger Syrah, very often the color is quite similar. When you look at the color of this, very purple on the rim. Zweigel is really about freshness, the fruity, aromatic approach. There's some very serious styles of Zweigel produced, aged in barrels, in the oak age, but generally, like the majority of Zweigel is about having something which is joyful, fresh, and fruity.
And that's exactly what this is. I mean, someone's mentioned a vanilla element to it. I can definitely see that. Often vanilla is something that comes from sort of oak, but in this respect, yeah, I definitely say there's a sort of, it's almost like vanilla. It's almost like some sort of vanilla blackcurrant ice cream type of flavor going on. Yeah.
I think it's very nice to drink just now. I mean, like you said, it's so good. You know, it's like this is a wine which you can easily chill. This is a wine which you put on a barbecue. You have a barbecue. I'm sure a lot of people will have barbecues in the future. There's no doubt about it. Everyone will invite all of their family to have barbecues. So this is a wine which you just pop in the ice for 5-10 minutes outside. It doesn't matter which glass you use too much. And it's like, it's a fresh, elegant style. And that's just the first glass of red wine. You'll be like, oh, that's good. And works with a variety of different things. This for us, for example, is really good with pork. You know, it's like barbecue pork. You know, you're gonna be in heaven with this. Who knew Austria was that hot? Yeah, Austria can be hot. You know, if you go into this area, north of Vienna and east of Vienna, it's actually very hot during summer. And actually the eastern part of Vienna, which is called Burgenland, that's not too far away from here. And the second wine is from Burgenland. They wanted to be part of Hungary after the First World War, but the Hungarians didn't want them. But super flat area, very hot, very windy, really good for red wine production. And there's this, if you've seen an Austrian map, there's this lake which is shared between Austria and Hungary, which is called Neusiedler See. It's one of the biggest lakes within Europe. Very flat, very shallow, makes it ideal for sweet wine production, makes it very good for red wine production. And there was another one. The wine is sold out in the shop. I'm sure there will be a moment where we'll come back. Was it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is here, so I will change that almost immediately after the tasting, because
You're just holding back, Chris. That's the reason why.
yeah, absolutely. But I hopefully that means that you're enjoying this one. But yeah, it's definitely, you know, having a Zweigel in the house. And in fact, these guys, this wine is called Vom Haus, being their sort of, you know, their kind of entry house style essentially, which is showing off sort of what they do best.
One more question.
Yeah, city break.
How easy is it to visit any vineyards when staying in Vienna without a car? Loving combining a city break with wine tasting. You are in real luck there, because Vienna is so far, there's 2 capital cities in the world which have wine production. It's Madrid in Spain and Vienna. So we have around 600 hectares of wine production in Vienna within the city boundaries. So with public transport, you can very, very easily go to vineyards and visit them. It's very traditional for us to have, we call this Heuriger, which is essentially a small inn or a small pub, sometimes can be outside or sort of on a terrace, where we serve local cuisine with the local wines. Very often wine producers will have some sort of tavern or pub or inn where they serve their own wine. So it's very, very easy actually, as a matter of fact. And if you like, for example, wine number 4, there's a bit of Zweigel planted in Vienna, and there's a good amount of Pinot Noir actually, because the soil is very similar to Burgundy, very limestone, very chalk driven. And you find similar blends than we had with wine number 4 is blind, you find in Vienna as well. And a good amount of Grün and Riesling. So you get a little bit of everything in Vienna. But to cut the long story short, very easy to visit, very easy to get around. Even with public transport to go to Kamptal or to Kremstal or to Wachau, where we've been before, it will take you in public transport an hour at its best.
That's definitely on the list then, isn't it?
It's more affordable than the British transport system. So it's like, it's cheap as chips.
and on time, and things as well. No crazy delays because of leaves on the line, that sort of thing. Yeah, dreaming of travels, Joe says, absolutely. And you know, certainly a lot of my sort of tourism probably in the last 15 years has often been around wine. You know, often sort of wine where vineyards are generally beautiful places. So you know, it's the draw there for lots of reasons. So definitely that's Vienna's on my to-do list.
Bucket list.
when that can happen. So yeah, I mean, we spoke a little bit about Burgenland just there, and also potentially how sort of warm it can get there, and that sort of dictates the style there of wine number 5. Being Blaufränkisch. Here we've got Nitnaus, again, quite a sort of small producer, very much focused on their biodynamics. And a big thing about biodynamics, not wanting to go to sort of the nth degree, but in terms of what organic and biodynamic and the differences, similarities, essentially I would often say the organic is basically sort of working within limits of what you can, what you're allowed to do to an extent, and it takes time to be certified. That's largely, it takes time for the earth to sort of get back to maybe how it was. With biodynamics, it's more sort of almost like I was going to say lifestyle type thing. It's the holistic approach of what's going on in your vineyard.
I mean, it's very often related to the lunar calendar. So there's a biodynamic calendar where you do certain work in the vineyard or in the winery on certain days.
Yeah.
So you can buy a lunar calendar and you can figure out if this is a fruit day, a roots day, and you figure out, okay, if it's a root day, it's good to work in the vineyard. If it's a fruit day, it's not only good to eat fruits, it's good to drink wines. So he has a very holistic approach, but the biodynamic principle and the organic certification is something which is quite big for us. But the reason why they do it is not to get a certificate on the label. They very often do it in order to leave something for the generations behind and to make sure they look after the land.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's there's lots of things. I suppose some people pour a bit of scorn on that sort of lunar cycle element, but I feel as if it's the process and activity of doing that is trying to sort of really sort of grow with the land in a sense. It's about encouraging sort of nature back to the vineyards, and just wanting it to be part of the sort of ecosystem, which I think is really sort of just really sort of vital for the I suppose the health of the land, really. And yeah, and unfortunately I don't think we're at a stage yet where necessarily there's a way of being people can have it on their labels as such, but it's so difficult for people to really explain on the back of a bottle what practices they're doing, what they aren't doing in terms of their biodynamics. Really, it's I suppose organics is a bit more of a tick box.
Yeah, maybe worth bearing in mind that some people don't do it because they don't want to fill in the paperwork. So it's it's a personal choice. I mean, with wine number 4 and 5, you see quite a bit of a difference in terms of the flavor and taste profile as well. And maybe words to number 5 is because if you have a look on the paper, there's written Kalk und Schiefer, which is translated to chalk or limestone and slate. So that refers to the soil condition. It's a very poor rock, chalk and limestone, which gives the wine quite a bit of a tension, a bit of almost a tannic feel to it. I like to compare this with when you have your peachy tips and you infuse it maybe a tick too long and it becomes slightly astringent, slightly bitter. Tannins are maybe best explained in that way. And with 5, certainly you have a little bit more of a crunchy fruit to it. There's certainly a savory element there, a bit of a spicy, peppery element which is there. Blaufränkisch is not always the grape variety which is very aromatic or very fruit-driven. There's some dark fruits there. But it's a quite interesting comparison when you take the Zweigelt, which is very much about fruit, and when you take the Blaufränkisch, which is more about the savory elements. Not everyone appreciates fruits. People would like to have something which has maybe a more earthy element there, a more smoky element, and this savory element. And then Blaufränkisch is more your thing. These two things are very, very different. It's like for us, there's a reason why we blend Zweigelt and Blaufränkisch, because they're just very, very different in the glass or as a final product.
Yeah, and it's sort of potentially a sort of drier style in terms of drying, maybe on the palate. Almost a bit more of a sort of earthy kind of nature, and I don't mean that in a in a bad sense necessarily. But just it's sort of there's almost more of a textural element to this one, and it certainly showcases that it is from a warmer climate. I'd say it has got that extra bit of weight to it. It's also sells, it's got a few years on it as well. It's sort of 4 years old as well, and I think it's still very vibrant in terms of what it's offering in terms of the wild strawberry and the sort of dark fruits that's going on. Obviously, I think someone mentioned they're struggling a bit with number 5, and I think and I suppose that's sort of largely the point of trying these sort of things side by side, because they are very different. They are showing different aspects to what you can get from a country and from regions that aren't too far from each other, really. I think it's
wine is such a subjective thing. The things which you like, the things which you don't like. I don't like every wine which is put in front of me either, and that is the great thing by having 6, so you can choose what you like the most. And obviously they are quite different. Having said it, it's like there's sometimes a moment where very often these wines, they start to shine once you have them with something else. They are not very often Zweigelt is consumed on its own very easily. Blaufränkisch, you very often pair with food. You want to have something to eat with it.
Yeah, and you could definitely get away with some richer foods there. Potentially even your sort of Sunday roast and things, because you could definitely pair this with. I would have.
Now I'm getting hungry, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that time of night where we might not have eaten yet, so.
Well, we have a sweet finish as well now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Literally.
So, yeah, exactly. I mean, I was just going to mention about the Blaufränkisch just in terms of flavour. For me, I get a little bit of a sort of a nuance of maybe a Beaujolais from it. Not in terms of how obviously light a Beaujolais normally is, but certainly maybe one of the sort of fuller style of Beaujolais. But there's just something there, isn't it, that gives it that sort of fragrance and that earthiness, which I think is just really interesting and is sort of very different to Zweigelt. And I appreciate that's maybe not sort of for everybody, but would work definitely with pairing it with sort of fuller foods essentially.
I think it just shows diversity in a country, and like Blaufränkisch. And to put this in perspective, I said before, 30% of the Austrian production is red. Give or take, Zweigelt takes up out of this 30% 2/3, so it's a quite widely planted variety. And Blaufränkisch is more the minor one, and there isn't that much around. So you find Blaufränkisch internationally speaking as well in other countries like Hungary and as well in Germany. So it's a variety which is a bit more traveled to that extent than Zweigelt is.
Would you ever see Zweigelt and Blaufränkisch sort of blended with other grapes, like maybe international?
Yeah, it's quite common. Blaufränkisch, as you experienced all now, is something which has a certain crunch and a certain intensity to it. Blaufränkisch quite often is blended with international varieties like Merlot. As we explained before, with the sun hours which we get, as working on our tan in Burgenland, we do plant international varieties like Cabernet Sauvignon as well, which ripen without any problem. But you do blend quite often actually Zweigelt and Blaufränkisch together, because just to put this in perspective, the Blaufränkisch has the more savory element, and Zweigelt has the more fruity element. Those two things in a blend normally work quite well with each other. So there's another variety which we call St. Laurent, which is partly related to Pinot Noir, which is quite widely planted in Austria as well, and very often blended with Blaufränkisch too. So Maybe you can compare this with classic Bordeaux. It's not all the time that you find Cabernet on its own and Merlot on its own. Very often they are blended with each other. You find your classic Bordeaux blends on the left bank where Cabernet is blended with Cab Franc and Merlot. And on the right bank, Merlot is blended with Cabernet. So it's like very often for us is what we blend different varieties together.
I've often found Saint Laurent can be maybe a little bit richer and a little bit sort of more sort of full on as well.
Yeah, we call it the spicy Pinot. So we call it if you like your Pinot Noir with a bit of a kick, you go for Saint Laurent.
Yeah, there you go. That's what it says on the tin. So final wine then of the night, which is sort of really exciting to show, and it again displays the versatility of Austrian wine. Really, people maybe when they think about Austrian wine, maybe they think about sweeter wines potentially. Even though, as we learned before, the Rieslings are often drier. But I think possibly with the sort of often the fluted bottles and things like that maybe people will get the impression that you have sweeter wines. Plus, you've got ice wine, which is produced by some producers in Austria as well, where obviously grapes are picked when they're frozen at a certain temperature, and therefore the wine you end up with there's a real intensity to it, because firstly there isn't much there's not much sort of liquid there to go around to get small amounts, and it's very intense. So that's something that Austria potentially is known for. Here we're back to Domaine Wachau, and it's their beer and Auslese. So here you're getting a sweeter wine. It's mainly Riesling based with a bit of Pinot Blanc, I think, in it, and Rivener as well, which you often you get in Germany and Alsace as well, actually. And beer and Auslese basically determines the sort of sugar content of it, essentially. But you're getting that concentration here. And it's I think sweet wines are one of those things that there's a sweet wine out there for sort of everybody in a sense, but they're sort of not all the same. There's so much variety, but it's all about the balance. It's about whether the sweetness works in balance with as I said before, with the acidity and the acids. And in this respect, I think it absolutely does. I mean, there's wonderful concentration on the nose. You're getting sort of apricot, you're getting sort of mango. It's quite sort of tropical, which just really shows what sort of how versatile possibly Riesling is as a grape variety as well. Often Riesling is at the heart of a lot of these dessert wines, particularly in Austria and Germany, and so which adds a little bit to the confusion over Riesling in terms of what it does produce. But it can be so it can produce things from bone dry to ultra sweet, and again, sort of food pairing for something like this, I'd be tempted just to have it on its own. But some sort of like apricot tart or something would be lovely, or even again a sort of bit of cheese. I mean, potentially a sort of
works really good for blue cheese. If you like your Roqueforts, as soon as you have something which has a certain saltiness in the cheese, works quite good with it. But you can pair this quite easily with your Stilton or your Stichelton. Does a good job with this. So it's quite versatile. We traditionally pair it quite often with cream-based desserts. So it could be like, we have tradition in this area apricot dumplings, because apricot trees are growing there, so we make it with apricot dumplings.
Okay.
But yeah, it's all the time when we produce sweet wine, it's about having a certain degree of freshness there as well. I think Simone said this, like, I like this, it does have a certain amount of acid. Yeah, it's very important for us when we produce sweet wine that we have sweet, it's not too sweet, it's sweet wine, but it's fresh. You can have easily a second glass of this. And that makes the overall balance. For me, this is a very important one. All of these are just elements, acidity, alcohol, tannins, but they need to work in harmony together. And for sweet wine in particular, the secret very often is to have that freshness there, which makes it not just palatable, but it makes it very enjoyable.
Yeah, and it's a wonderfully approachable style as well. I think if people aren't maybe used to drinking a sort of sweeter dessert wine, I think this is it's got lovely sort of roundness to it. It's concentrated, but it's not it's not wild like some of them can be, with maybe ultra richness and maybe ultra sticky sweetness. It's definitely got that freshness to it, as you say, and just yeah, it's a sort of, I can't get mango out of my head. So mango and apricot is just really jumping out of this. So for this one, Stefan, would they therefore have almost particular vineyards where they would take the grapes from for a style like this?
Yeah, very often you need to work in a financial okay way, because the financial department is always going to be on your heels. So what they do is they pick at a certain time. Let's make an example, September, maybe end of September, and they produce out of these grapes a dry white wine. Then there will be maybe a richer style of a white which is produced, which they pick a little bit later. So the grape is going to be naturally riper because they were longer on the wine. And when you have a category like sweet wine, like Bernarslese, they don't pick everything from these vineyards. They leave certain grapes or certain bunches on there, and they will pick them later, maybe in November, maybe December. And there's one thing which is coming through here, and this is typical for Bernarslese, is what is called noble rot or botrytis. So it's a fungus which is affecting the grape, is dehydrating it, but as the name suggests, it's noble, so it's good. That's the reason why you get this very specific flavor profile into these wines. In general, exotic fruits is always good. There's mangoes, pineapples, guave, lychees, but very often you get a bit of a saffron component there or some quince component. So that's something quite classic for sweet wines like this. But general, it's always different picking stages in the vineyard parcel. So for dry wines, you pick earlier. For sweeter wines, you pick later. And that can be anything between September or December. And as you mentioned, ice wine before. Ice wine traditionally is what comes from. There's some producers which are producing ice wine in this area. And it's picked at, by law, -7 degrees Celsius. So it's quite cold. And it's traditionally picked end of December, beginning of January. We normally pick this on the 1st of January because it's the best way to sober up any man, because it's just brilliant when you go out at 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, and you start picking it. Very often it's colder than -7. You guarantee it's going to be ready for the new year. So it's very, very cold. It doesn't happen every year, but ice wine is something which is quite unique for us.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard stories before about ice wine with it being one of those things where, obviously the conditions have to be just right, and it's a case of whatever time, day or night, that happens. It's on the phone to your team to get out there, be that Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve, whatever. It's like, oh,
I would generally say it's like if anyone offers you to make an ice wine harvest, that initial excitement will wear off very, very quickly once you're out there. Yeah. So maybe politely refuse if you can, but it sounds more glamorous than it is. And there's a reason why. For example, I don't know the price for this example, but or the cost price for this example, the selling price. But ice wine, for that reason, is never cheap. There's a certain price tag to it because it's a labor of love, and it's a labor of really dedication when and how to pick. And there's a lot of work. No machine in the world can do this. It's all hand harvested, so you can't do this with a machine. So it's a lot of work going into it. But yeah, if anyone offers you an ice wine harvest, just politely walk away.
and talking about price for this, I mean, it's 19.95 for a half bottle. But as you say, that's the nature of the beast, really, with dessert wines, particularly when you're talking about these botrytis affected grapes, because firstly of what they're doing with it in terms of shriveling it up, so the juices, you're not going to get too much juice out of each bunch, plus all the sorting that has to go on to actually make sure that you're putting the right ones, that you're using the right grapes, and that'll be sorting within the vineyard, then the sorting table as well, just to make sure that you are actually putting the right level of botrytis grapes in.
Considering all of this, it's not effective from a business point of view to only produce sweet wine. You're not making much money with this because the labor of love which is going into and the hours, it's not. You do this in addition to your portfolio, but you don't do it to make money.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's not often it's not produced every year either. I don't think, is it, for people?
The climatic condition which needs to be right. And we have
Yeah.
some really lovely comments there with food and wine pairings. Venison pate, I would love to have a venison pate as well right now.
Yeah.
Florentines, very good one as well. And I have to say, I'm getting hungry at this stage, but it's maybe interesting to see now we've got two very, very different approaches, and with on the one hand venison pate, on the other hand with Florentines, and I think both is really lovely to go with it. We pair this quite often as well with general pates or chicken liver pates and things like this. It works really well. But now it's good to see that people seem to enjoy the sweet. It's good to have it in the end. It's like I always feel like it's that little sugar rush which you get, which lifts you up in the end of a tasting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be able to finish on sweet wine. I think for that point of view, yeah, it just gives that lift. And hopefully people might have a little bit left in their glass of a couple of them or something. So it's always nice to maybe to go back as well. But I'll probably have some water before you go back to one of the whites or the red, to sort of wash your mouth out and sort of try and reset. But definitely, yeah, I think for wine tasting, ending on a sweet one is always a nice thing to do. Which sort of brings me a little bit onto our next tasting, which will be in a month's time, on the 22nd of April, which is the wines of the Loire Valley, and that will probably end on a sweet one as well. That's what we're hoping, anyway. So that we obviously love to see people on that. There is the tickets to the Loire one should be on the website, I think, but again, I'll double check that. You're going to keep me at work for longer tonight, updating products and tickets. But no, they should be okay. You just try to book. Yeah, essentially there's going to be a different way of booking in this one, in terms of we're going to because we can't really. It's difficult to do sparkling wines in a tasting like this. So we're going to add on a bottle of sparkling that you can sort of add to the tasting, if you like. That obviously then you can sort of have at your leisure. And we'll talk a little bit about on the night itself, but won't be necessarily one of the actual wines that we'll sort of taste through as such. So be, but I'll double check that in terms of the tickets for you tonight as well. Though, if you are trying to book, there is we do have a discount code of Loire 10. In fact, I'll put it in here. Should I, just to make sure? Which will be 10% off the ticket price, and that is valid until midnight. So yeah,
stay up tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. So now you're all sort of happy and lively with the beer and Auslese. Now's the time to get on the website. But no, I'll make sure it's all set up properly. But yeah, absolutely. You want to say two big sort of thanks here, obviously, to you guys for joining us tonight. It's great to doing this, and hopefully, you never know, the English one, if it's going to be end of June, I don't know, could that be on site here in the winery? Maybe, I don't know. But we would like that to be the case. But it could be here and streamed live as well. So that's opened up this sort of this technology to everybody. I certainly didn't know what Zoom was a year ago. And obviously to Stefan as well. It's been absolutely wonderful having you on tonight, and I really appreciate the passion you show for it and the depth that you've been able to give to our customers here. And yeah, it's a real sort of
pleasure.
I really appreciate it.
There's no better way of spending a Wednesday afternoon. So it's like, or Wednesday evening, I should say. It's like perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I really appreciate that. And yeah, we are just to give a bit of a sort of touch of a salesy bit. We are open now on Saturdays for walk-in trade. Hopefully next month it might even be Fridays and Saturdays. We'll keep you posted with newsletters and things like that. And so we're gradually getting back to it, but we do still offer same day delivery around the area. So we're never too far away. And it's just going to be wonderful having people back here at some point. But as I say, it's fantastic seeing some friendly faces there tonight, and I really appreciate everyone coming on to try this range of Austrian wines. I mean, we do have more Austrian wines in the shop, you know, from Domaine Wachau. Certainly, Jamie, one of the sort of founders here, has a lot of passion for Domaine Wachau. So there's some wines that we'll certainly have on the shelves for some time. Other bits sort of come and go, but it's really what we're led by, and potentially what the season is as well. Certainly, you know, it's coming to springtime, so Grüne Rieslings, Zweigelts for your whites, particularly for barbecues, as Stefan was saying. You know, that's definitely the order of the day, hopefully. Yeah, and we have I think we've got an Austrian wine case as well, which includes these as well, which comes with a bit of money off in terms of from buying them separately too. So lots going on. Thanks again to everybody, and yeah, look, I hope that finished well with the sweet one. If you do have some more of the other ones, go back and retry them, see how they're developed. There's some wonderful wines there.
Well, thank you very much as well from my side. Thanks for listening, and thanks for the engagement and the interesting questions, and thanks for the nice comments. Very much enjoyed being here, and hopefully one day in person, who knows, you know, maybe at the winery would be wonderful. But for the time being, you know, wish just everyone well. Enjoy the remaining, if you have some remaining wine, who knows, but just enjoy the last bits, and I hope to see you one day.
Great stuff. Appreciate that, Stefan. And yeah, all the best, everybody, and hope to see you down here on a Saturday and potentially for one of these future tastings. And yeah, all the best. Enjoy your evening, and thanks for coming along.
Thanks, gentlemen. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much. Cheers. Take care.